are you? I've been asked this question and have been expected to respond with something about my race. Why is race the initial answer to this question? I never hear the words, I'm a student, or I'm a person, both very true answers to this question. It is always race. We live in a society where who you are determines a person's status in life, whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, or a grocery clerk. Many will argue that this is not a true statement, or that we live in a century where racism is not a factor anymore. In fact, it is. We live in a country with many racial prejudices based off of many unfair, unethical, and inhuman treatments of people, and the prejudices that plagued our ancestors still plague us today. In America, it is known that there was much slave labor that went into developing this country to what it is today, whether that be from indentured servant slavery or the unethical slavery of many Africans, Native Americans, and Asians, as well as other races. As time went on and slave labor done by people who were stolen or traded into the slave trade, there came many prejudices with who people were and how their respective cultures functioned. After the slave labor has been abolished in America, the slaves were free physically, but not socially. People who thought lowly of any race that was not white, and these thoughts were generated from generation to generation. Why? Behaviors and thinking patterns are taught, not known. The mindset that was taught was that if a person looked differently from you, they were lower than you. And from that person, and from what a person is taught as a child, is what will be passed on to further generations. With that state of mind, there is no way that discrimination can be stopped. The way a person or certain group of people is talked about or treated in a positive or negative light is determined by the parenting generation. My father had once told me of a story from when he was a child growing up in 1960s Los Angeles. His mother, who was Mexican, rented an apartment for the family. His father, who was black, came home from work to the newly leased apartment, but as soon as the landowners saw his father, they were kicked out and removed from the apartments. This was only about 45 years ago. It is easy to think that the discrimination that we learn about in schools was a century ago, and to put those stories on the back burner. But in reality, most of the popular stories and civil rights leaders were fighting for our country only about 50 years ago. The Jim Crow laws, segregated facilities, the March at Salem, and the assassinations of civil leaders Martin Luther King Jr., John F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, and Robert F. Kennedy were all during our grandparents' time and many of our parents' lifetimes. There have been many advances in society since then, but we cannot forget that we are the first true generation to not experience this severe manner of racism. Many children of the previous generation are still afflicted with prejudice, and those people include heads of major corporations and businesses. This past September, a head of a financial corporation said that their client, Rihanna, was hot because she is not too dark. Yes, in the past 50 to 60 years, the United States has been drifting apart from its racist foundations. But statements like these certainly set us back a few decades and gives evidence that racism is still very prominent. To try to stop this contorted way of thinking, we should be exposed to each other and our different cultures and put an end to this ungodly way of thinking and feeling. We should accept people for who they are. How different would our lives be and our society be if race were not a factor in our everyday lives and in social media? Make an effort to put aside the programmed stereotypes and pre-made assumptions about people that we have made based off of their race alone. Get to know a person. We are all the same. For once, let our races not define the preconceived notions of what we may become, but let our mind and our souls determine who we will be.